126. On page 127, ensuring economic vitality. Nothing there. 128. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you read through this, and it talks about our economic development and a strong and diversified economy, what I find is right now we're spending, I think it's $1 million to promote tourism in Norfolk County right now. And I think something has to happen there. We either have to move some of that budget over to business retention and expansion and focus less, or we have to add some money in the program for that. Right? We know that our downtown core businesses are weak. Right? They can use all the support that we can give them right now. And while we concentrate on tourism, we bring in some money. Obviously, we don't have the housing. As per Clark's presentation to us a couple days ago, we don't have the housing to bring in the big amounts of money. But I really think that we need to step it up as far as bringing businesses and industry to Norfolk County. We don't have much service land, but there is private land available for sale. When I've done a cost comparison on the commercial or the industrial taxes, we're the cheapest around. And like I see that the official plan has the policies in place, but we don't really run with it. Like, you know, it talks strengthening the county's economic base through a greater diversification of available business and employment land. But really, that's just a placeholder of nothingness, because if we don't have a plan to address that, where are we going with all that? And I know this isn't a planning thing. This is a shift in strategic direction thing that we need to address, and I'm not sure how to get it out there so that we can address it.
Mr. Baird?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Next year, we'll be doing our new economic development strategy, and it will obviously it's going to have ties to this official plan review that we're doing right now, and that'll be the opportunity for input from the business community as well from council on where we should be targeting our resources. I appreciate what you're saying. I think that figure, you're talking about the whole budget, but we do, you know, various things. It's not just tourism promotion. I'll speak to Clark, and I hear routinely, Councillor Columbus, we spoke on Tuesday night as well, and I know your position, Councillor Height, but that would be the time to do it when we do that strategic plan. So I'll put Clark on notice, and that might be through TDAB, of which I know yourself and Councillor Brunton are on. We'll get that discussion going about how that's all going to roll out and when there'll be opportunities to review the strategy.
Councillor Columbus.
Yes, so Chris, can we rejig some responsibilities within your staff complement to address more pro-industrial growth and commercial growth?
Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. We have had some successes. I can think of a couple right now that we're working on. You know, Titan Trailers, Toyotetsu Phase 4. Yep. Well, there's a lot of things happening there. We are fairly nimble that way. We can move, but if that is the desire of this council, and we can bring those ideas forward, and just it's not about adding more resources in that area. I think it's about targeting it in the direction that council wishes to go. You certainly have my commitment on that.
Look, I know we're really well prepped up with tourism and agriculture for sure, but I think it's the jobs in manufacturing that we're lacking.
Thank you. Page 128, location of economic activity. Page 129, promoting agriculture. Page 130, 131, tourism is there. 132, 133, natural resources. Moving on to 134, 135, 136, and 137. Forestry is on the bottom. 138, 139, 140, employment activity. 141, 142, potential contaminated sites. Do we have a number of these? Are we aware of them, or?
Any former gas station, a lot of industrial sites are potential contaminated properties. So the province has guidelines on how to deal with the conversion of those properties to more sensitive uses. And so this policy addresses how the county will deal with that.
Are they still addressed as brownfields? Is that, at one time it was with the province? I don't know if that still is or not.
Yes, it's still referred to, they're still referred to as brownfields.
Okay, thank you. Page 143, 44, 45, 46, source water protection. 147, 148, 149, 50. You're smiling, Councillor Wells. 151.
I was just thinking, Mr. Chair, if ever we have another meeting, I'm going to make sure we feed this council first, because I notice there's a difference between being fed and not being fed.
Well, that seems to be all of you, so not me. 152, 153, 154, 155. Hopefully, if you've done your homework, you should be able to bring these up. 156, 157, 58, 158, 159. Back? Okay. Council?
There, I caught you just in time, Mr. Chair.
That's okay.
So we spoke
I
of
can
that
go back.
wetland at the Simcoe airports earlier. Now, was that little mud puddle, was that classified as provincially significant wetland?
The chair, yes, that area is provincially significant. Through the chair, yes, that area is provincially significant wetland.
So in here you have some setbacks. So what is it, local, provincial? Where is that in here for the 120 meters? Is that what it would be?
Through the chair, on page 157, table 4, it will become. This is to do with the areas that the province said you can't do development within those. So we have the provincially significant wetlands and the provincially significant coastal wetlands, and the adjacent land is listed there, the 120.
So that pretty much dooms all the land 120 meters around that one piece of property? Is that how I understand it?
Through the chair, what the policies are is that an environmental impact study would be done for those areas that are adjacent to the provincially significant feature. And if the environmental impact study says that you can do it if you do X and Y and not have a negative impact, then the development could, if everything else was okay, council could approve that.
So in your professional opinion, do you think they would ever allow another mall or plaza to be built out there with all of the pavement?
Through the chair, I think that's very difficult to answer at this point. The studies need to be done to indicate whether there'll be an impact or whether, I think in that situation, Pam might be better able to answer this. There's some stormwater retention ponds and things to ensure the quality of water going into the wetland is maintained, but I'm not sure if there was other things. But that's the sort of thing that you would look at through that study so that you could decide whether or not, given the data, that it would be appropriate.
Okay, so my last question then is, like, say a locally significant wetland, you have the same thing as 120 meters, and yet the significant wildlife habitat is down to 50 meters because it's defined by MNRF. Is that the minimum you can go for our locally significant wetlands?
Through the chair, the way I look at it is if you have a property and there's some natural heritage feature on it, you want to develop that property and say there's a significant wildlife habitat or natural area there, if you're going to develop outside of the 50 meters, go ahead. But if you're going to develop within that 50 meters that's adjacent, then you need to do an environmental impact study to see if it'll have no negative impact on the features and functions of that natural area. So that's the way I look at it, a little differently perhaps.
Okay, well, the one below that, though, the locally significant wetlands, it's based at 120 meters. Okay, I guess I have a bit of a problem with that out in the West End, considering we're making wetlands. So 120 meters is a pretty long ways. You can pretty much stop your neighbor from building a shed by creating some kind of a wetland out there. It just seems excessive to me. If the province is using 120, why are we using the same standard when it can cause such a problem?
Through the chair, as far as I know, that's the standard that has been set by the province in the Natural Heritage Manual, where we can look up distances, but I wouldn't mind doing some research on that and following up to let you know what it says on locally significant wetland, because it may or may not have a reduction at distance. I'm not sure at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Further, Councillor Columbus.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at page 158 in that chart there, table 5. Significant woodlands. Question, if somebody has a 100-acre farm and they have significant woodland on it, as stated there, can they cut down a tree in that significant woodland? Is there anything to stop them from cutting down a tree?
Through the chair, the tree preservation bylaw does permit people to cut trees for their own firewood, for their own use, and I believe there's also something in that regarding clearing the edge of woodlots to retain the field. So trees tend to grow and encroach into the field, so they're permitted under that bylaw to remove some of that.
So let's say somebody's looking to develop something else on their property and they have to stay so many feet from the drip line. If they cut down that tree, then the drip line changes, right? I think we saw that, an application like that with the Vandenbush Lakeshore Vista project. If he would have cut down a tree, it would have moved the drip line. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Through the chair, yes, I understand.
So how do we get around something like that?
Through the chair, it would be my suggestion that the landowner needs to figure out the development and what they're going to do in advance of coming forward with an application.
Because if you cut down the tree, then it would certainly help us cause, really.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on this, on the same chart to Mary. Mary, I know we have different classes of woodlands, just as we do have different classes of wetlands. And I see we've distinguished for the wetlands, in other words, locally significant or different policies than provincially, and yet now that Councillor Columbus brought my attention to it, the woodland doesn't distinguish between provincially significant and locally. So where would that kind of distinction and the appropriate policies be in our OP?
Through the chair, I'm going to give a little bit of a background here before I come back to the specific question. This section of the plan, we really did not review. The only change we've done is reordered things, and then the provincial policy statement had coastal wetlands, and they had moved wildlife habitats. So those are the only changes we made to this section. We have had in the list of projects to do a natural heritage strategy, and that has been put off. It's further down the line. So at this point, we haven't done anything like look at any specifics in this section. So the woodlands and whether or not you could have locally significant or provincially significant, I've not seen any of that. At the time we added the significant woodlands policy to our official plan, There wasn't anything in the research that I recall that anyone was doing locally and provincially significant woodlands. So it can be checked to see if anyone is doing that kind of thing at this point, but I'm not familiar with there being anything. I think, though, it should be part of that bigger project that I alluded to when I first started my answer to you. Thank you.
That's interesting, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
because, and this may go back to before I came on council when I was still with LPRCA, but I recall very distinctly that because Norfolk County has so much forest cover and so many woodlots of varying sizes, that we, as a community, or that Norfolk County did designate a certain minimum size for a woodlot to be provincially significant and a separate woodlot to be just locally, because we would have lots of, let's say, 5-acre woodlots, whereas if you go down into Chatham, Kent, they've got very, very few, so they're much more significant, so to speak. And yet I think I heard Mary say we don't currently distinguish within our OP at all between what might be significant provincially and what might be significant locally. And if that's the case, then I think that clearly is something that we need to do, because we don't want to be imposing provincial, quote, regulatory standards on a woodlot that is a very common element of our landscape here in this county. So I would appreciate if staff would check into that for us, because my recollection is that was done. Now, obviously, my memory's bad because I'm getting old, but I thought we had dealt with that as a community a number of years ago. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I could, there
ahead.
is a difference in designation. The size of woodlots in the eastern part of the county is, in order to be significant, is smaller than the woodlots that were designated in the west part. So there is a study that was done, and there was mapping that was done, and there was a special report, and council directed that we use 2 different sizes when we designated significant woodland.
Okay, the question that, okay, I do have one question. I know someone who has a farm and they have forest, but they also have a creek that runs through the property. Now, is that considered to be a significant woodlot where it's along the creek? I mean, there's a valley with a creek below. Can you harvest the trees in that area?
To the chair, the tree preservation bylaw permits you to harvest trees,
Okay,
and they have certain conditions. So I'll leave that there because that's not my area of expertise.
okay. But
As-
you are allowed to harvest the forestry, I guess, in that
Yeah.
area.
As far as the criteria for designating significant woodlands, one of the criteria, as I recall, was closeness to a water feature. So it might increase its significance when it has that for more wildlife habitat. But that's as much as I can remember. It's been a while.
Go ahead.
I may be able to assist. There is a harvest permit application process. So there is a process for tree harvesting of some sort, and it involves a kind of a review by our community services department. And I get the permit applications when they're all done, but I just put them in our files. I don't really review them myself, but I'm just aware of the process.
I guess one of the things that also could have a problem with cutting a lot of trees, because the canopy actually cools the water as well, so that can have an impact on trout, I guess. Anyway, page 159, anything there? 160, 161, 162, 163. I'm going too fast, let me know. 164, 165.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
thank you. On 165, through you to staff, I read with interest this whole section on Long Point. That seems to be something that nobody is sure where we seem to be going or not going, but on page 165, throughout this it talks about the biosphere, a world biosphere unique ecological systems. It goes through everything in there in 644, and I think it's right on the money. And at the end of 644, it says, it refers to the Long Point sand spit, no development shall be permitted on the Long Point sand spit. What specifically, I guess the first thing is, I don't know what or how you define the word development here, because development can mean a lot of different things, especially when you're in a environmentally sensitive World Biosphere Reserve. So I don't know exactly what we mean by development here. And secondly, what exactly defines the sand spit? Is it, for example, the tip of Long Point at where the lighthouse is, near the tip, all the way to the end of Hastings Drive, including the marsh, all the way to including the causeway to the mainland on the west side of Port Rowan? Any thoughts there? And I know that, I don't want to get into lengthy debate on this of, what we're doing at Long Point, but what do we mean by no development shall be permitted on the Long Point sand spit?
Through the chair to Mayor Luke, in the first sentence of that paragraph, it says, it shall be the policy of the county that the Long Point sand spit, which is part of the Long Point Biosphere Core area, and more specifically defined as the area east of the Long Point Provincial Park. So that's the definition of how they're using the Long Point sand spit for this particular policy.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I did look at the maps of Long Point. I think they're C7 or 8. Trying to remember. If I could get Mary to go to map C7, for example. You're basically saying on this map that the spit is, I guess, east of the provincial park through to Hastings. Is that fair? No. I'm going the wrong way. That's why I'm asking to make sure I know when people talk about the sand spit. So you're basically saying from the provincial park out to the tip of Long Point.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Now I have it, and now I know for sure. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Height and then Councillor Oliver.
Thank you. Mayor, I guess when you say no development, then how do you allow development that goes on there now? Like, we know there's cottages on Gravelly Bay. We know there's the Long Point Company. And they're right in that area. Is it the issue where if you're remote enough or off the grid enough, you can develop?
Councillor Height raises some good questions. I've never seen an application for there. I don't think building staff have either. Might be something Chris Baird might want to comment on.
Chris?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, the question was about development on Long Point. There are cottages, you're correct, Gravelly Bay, there's a number of out there. We can see them from our GIS mapping, and of course the Long Point Company that's existed. I'm not sure about the dates on that. Certainly there's never been a building permit issued there. Our CBO and MPAC are kind of looking into those. I think actually, Councillor Height, you'd offered a boat ride out there at one point. So yeah, I think even if that was the case, Pam, Mary, would that not be considered perhaps legal non-conforming from a land use perspective, and notwithstanding the building permit piece?
I don't think we're prepared to comment on legal or not. Just, we know it's there.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on map C7 for a further moment, if you don't mind. When I was looking at the legend after the mayor brought up his point, I'm surprised that the area that's shown on the map as Long Point Biosphere Reserve core area, which is the solid purple line, is as small as it is. Wouldn't that logically continue right off the map? In other words, everything east of the Long Point Provincial Park, as you've said, is part of the core area, isn't it? Out to the end of the sand spit. Oh, am I just misreading? Okay. Gotcha. I guess there is, still appears as though, oops, I'm so sorry. Still a gap in there, or is it's intended to be all of it, in other words, between those two maps?
Through the chair, there is a difference between the buffer area, which is the purple
Oh, yes,
dashed line.
I
And
no, I
it's quite a
understand
bit
that.
more extensive. And
Yeah.
then the core areas are smaller. So this mapping would have come from the Biosphere Reserve people that would have given us this. So we've added Bacchus this year that was not there before because that was a new designation. But the other one, yeah, that's what we have from the Biosphere Reserve themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on, page 166, 167, 168, 169, 170, 171, 172, 173, special needs housing. Page 174, 175, 176, 179. Is there any change in the garden suites when we talked about this last time, that after so many repeats, you have to go back and start all over again? Are we going to change that somehow or other, or how are we going to deal with that?
Mr. Chair, it has changed. The temporary use bylaw will be for 11 years,
Okay,
and then renewable for 3-year periods up to a total of 20 years.
okay, thank you. 177, 178, 179, 180, 181, parks, neighborhood parks, 182, 183, man, we're really going through them now. 184 and 185. 186, 187, 188, and 189, 190, 191, 192, 193, 194, 195, doesn't seem to be any changes here, 196, 197, sorry, Councillor Oliver.
I'm very sorry, Mr. Chairman. You
What
got
page
ahead of
are
me.
you on?
No, that's okay. I have a question on page 187, which is with respect to archaeological resources.
Okay, go ahead.
And I must admit, for me, this is a new term, although it's obviously in the old document, but an archaeological potential area. I guess I'm unclear as to what that means. I'm familiar with the term an archaeological site, which I think is one that's been identified as being of archaeological significance, and development within it might have to do an archaeological study. But what is our definition of an archaeological potential area?
My experience with archaeological master plans is that they identify areas that have archaeological potential. And those are areas normally close to streams or water bodies where there been a history of finding artifacts dating back to First Nations or very early settlers. The idea of doing or creating an area of archaeological potential is to determine where archaeological studies should be undertaken and where they are not required. So it's some ways it's helpful to the development people. They are very clear where that kind of investigation is required and where they don't require it, where it's not required.
Thank you for that, Matt. I do recall, Mr. Chairman, down in Port Rowan, I can't remember the name of the little subdivision, but as you go out on the front road towards Bird Studies Canada, thank you very much. In the Ducks Landing area, I recall the developer there approached me, and most likely other councillors as well at one point, saying that it, in his opinion, was very easy for an individual to raise a red flag of archaeological significance where it wasn't necessarily the case, and that required him to end up doing extensive studies. And so, while I appreciate Matt's response to my question, I'm not sure that I'm yet comfortable that we have a clear definition of what an archaeological potential area would be in the context of our official plan. Because I don't want us to trigger archaeological studies if someone has found an arrowhead somewhere, for example, or one fragment of pottery. What is the cutoff point, Mr. Chairman, that would trigger us requiring an archaeological study by an external expert?
Matt?
An archaeological master plan would give you that information. They are prepared by professional archaeologists who know the business, and it would be based on primarily on recorded archaeological sites that have been, I think, not registered at the province, and it's also subject to provincial review. But it's based on professional opinion as opposed to just someone finding a piece of artifact that may have been dropped there, or who knows how it got there. So it is based on observed facts and on their experience in terms of where the potential is likely to happen.
For that, Matt, and when he said that, I will admit in front of this council, I've been one of the members of council that has resisted us spending the money to undertake an archaeological master plan, and I'm still not sure that I support doing that. But I've now heard Matt say that's the only way you're going to avoid the scenario, I guess, that Ducks Landing was faced with. So we'll have to deal with that, I guess, at some point.
Councillor Brunton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on page 197, 198. Wow. And it deals with the different arterial collector or local roads. And the one, if you read the local issue, and it touches on sidewalks, and as you know, the other night we had the big discussion about omitting sidewalks up in, was it Delhi or Cortland? I can't even remember now.
Delhi,
anyway.
Not Cortland.
All right, anyways.
We don't have any sidewalks. Sorry.
You're lucky. Anyways, I'm wondering if we want a clause under the like, I've seen it happen twice, I think now, since recently, where we've debated over the sidewalks on some of these roads. And I'm wondering, I've always had the opinion of what arterial and collector roads should have for sidewalks, but local roads, and I stand by my belief that if everything's set backs and everything is done right, that you don't need sidewalks, because there is very little traffic, very little parking on the street, if any. And the streets are wide enough based on the current geometry we use to make a local road. And personally, I think we need to put a clause in there to say that in whatever, some wording that says in certain cases, sidewalks will be exempt on local roads. I don't know if how we word that or at our discretion, because we seem to get hung up on that at different times. And again, I don't think we need any, but we do have some, and in other cases, we have none. So is there some way, and I don't know if council would support it, that we can make some discretionary decisions in certain cases on local roads?
I'm not sure that that's something that would be into our official plan. I don't know whether staff can...
It is right on page 198 when you come down to...
198, okay, I'm sorry.
Right at the bottom of, what is it, 8.225, local roads on 197, and it goes over, and right at the bottom it says local roads are only seasonal, and then it says sidewalks generally be required on one side of local roads in instances where pedestrian traffic goes on and explains it all there, but I wonder if we could put some exception in there where we
Chris?
have some decision.
Chris?
So maybe a suggestion is maybe put the term may, so in the official plan it will provide some flexibility, but then we would look to Lee Robinson and through engineering, Jason's here for her this afternoon, they have their engineering design guidelines, and I think that's where council would want to decide where do sidewalks go, on 4-lane arterials or collectors, and have used that as the guideline, because that's what the engineering or development community would go to design their subdivisions, and that would be the standards that council would establish, or at least there's a tie to that, to the OP.
So you say use the word may.
I think so. I look to my experts here, is that it doesn't just say there should not be included, but may, that provides a bit of flexibility if council decides in some instances it chooses not to. And if they are in fact required, that would be laid out in the engineering design guidelines. And I know Mr. Houghton is working on that with his staff right now. So,
Well,
just
like,
a thought.
so under C, sidewalks shall generally, we could change that to sidewalks may, and that gives us a little more,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, certainly in the policy realm, there's a big difference between must, shall, and may.
yeah.
So
I would make that a motion if council supports it to, may generally be required.
Okay. The clerk's working on it right now, so anything from anyone else? Just give us a couple of minutes. Sorry, it's ready? Okay, go ahead.
That section 8225C be amended to read that sidewalks may generally be required.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? That is carried. So that's going into the plan. I need to go back a few pages because 191, 192, 193, 94, 195, 196, 197, and we've dealt with 198.
Mr. Chair, I have another question on 198.
Go ahead.
Maybe it's just me being unclear, but at the bottom of 198, the following shall be the policy of the county. I have any problem? A and B make sense to me. But when we get into section C, we see the word may 3 times. I thought that the county now was uniform across our urban areas where we no longer require cash in lieu for downtown parking businesses. If somehow I dreamed that up, I remember we had no parking requirements for downtown Simcoe, but in Port Dover, I think we had $8 per space, or 8,000 per space or something. And then was that not eliminated? So I guess my question is, when I read section C here, I get somewhat confused that we may reduce, or we may eliminate requirement. Well, what is it? If we're not going to have it mandatory to provide parking in our downtown cores, then I don't know why we're fooling around saying we may collect the money in lieu, may or may not, that we may want to collect money to apply it to a parking lot 4 blocks away, or 3 blocks. We want some off-street parking, so we may ask the developer to provide it. I mean, aren't we having enough trouble attracting development into our downtown cores? This section C to me is very, very confusing if I was coming to develop a building or a piece of property in any one of our downtown cores. I think I'd like to see this council say, is parking mandatory for development in the downtown core or not? And if the answer is no, let's get rid of the mays or shells. Let's say that parking in a downtown core is not a requirement of a developer. I mean, that's why we have public parking lots. That's why we have on-street parking in our downtown cores. Now, notwithstanding, I know that on a day like today, if it's a Saturday or Sunday in downtown Port Dover, we will never satisfy or we will never, ever address the needs. But read Section C, and if somebody can make some sense, do we want parking or don't we? And if we don't, then let's get it out of there. The may and the shells, and we will, and we might do parking and charge you for parking 4 blocks away. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Black.
Well, Mayor Luke, I know the BIA people have talked about this at their meetings, and you're right, it is confusing. If you look at it from the perspective of existing businesses, then really they should be exempt from parking. But what happens if there's redevelopment and you get a big apartment building wanting to relocate, and are you going to exempt the big apartment building? And then that's where you've got a juxtaposition on policies and requirements. So we may overwhelm the businesses with a residential need. So I think it might be one of the ways, and some of these suggestions did come from the BIA, to allow as much flexibility as possible in there, and maybe staff can comment further.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of those changes was to provide flexibility to council to do what they feel is appropriate in terms of parking management in downtown areas. And there's a variety of options. You can provide complete exemptions, which you do now, and not require a cash in lieu payment. But there may be a time, and this is a plan that's to go forward for 20 years, and you may, if you do your downtown development strategies, different options or programs or ideas about parking may evolve. So this is intended to provide council with considerable flexibility in how to deal with parking management in downtown areas.
Councillor, Mayor Luke.
Well, I guess it says the county in red may reduce or eliminate parking requirements. If our bylaw currently says you're exempt from downtown parking, then what are we exempting them from? I'm fully aware that when you get a Dover Wharf condo development that's residential, I'm not suggesting it's inside of the BIA area or the downtown area. I sort of get that. With 40 units there, will 40 spaces cover the parking requirements? Probably not. But let's take the Malibu Club here. Been sitting empty, deteriorating for the last, I don't know how many years. Now we've got a brand new developer that wants to redevelop it into housing. Tell me where they're going to put the parking. And I know I wouldn't have the nerve to go to the new owners and say I want some parking requirements, or you won't get the permits to redevelop. Because have we ever provided, has the Malibu Club ever in its 40 or 50 or 100 years of existence provided off-street parking? No. That's the point I'm making. And here it says we may reduce or eliminate parking requirements. I don't think we have parking requirements over there, regardless of what the use is, because you're exempt for providing off-street parking in the downtown cores. So I guess really it's that first sentence that the county may reduce or eliminate parking requirements. My question is, do we have parking requirements now in our downtown core? And if we don't, then get rid of that sentence, because I'm not going to go over here and expect them to produce off-street parking. And you know, Matt, I do agree with this statement. This is here for flexibility. But I'm not going to be asking people for something they don't have to legally provide under our bylaws in our downtown core to hold up a development. I would say to any council that asks me for a contribution for parking in a downtown development that I'm working on, show me that it's required. Oh, it's not required. Really, you're wasting my time. Get away from me. I don't have to provide it, I won't. That's not my problem. You passed the bylaw for no parking requirements. I don't know, I think I'm on track here. Maybe I'm reading this whole downtown thing improperly.
Councilor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Luke raised a good point. I think we had a discussion there a week or two ago about social housing, the need for low-income housing. There's many of those situations where people don't drive, but they need that type of housing. Higher density, and going back to the Malibu Club, if it develops, absolutely. If you could fit some multi-units in there they don't need parking. They're close enough to downtown to walk. So, but there are probably other places, I think, outside downtown core that may become higher density, smaller apartments for low-income people. So we have to have that flexibility, I think, the way we're going forward with an aging population and the need for the social housing and so forth, that we can't expect everybody to have a car or two. They're going to need to walk or use public transportation. So I think we need that flexibility somehow to not just in the downtown core, but in other areas. So thank you.
So how are we going to, is there a motion to make that change, or are we just going to leave it the way it is? Mayor Luke.
Well, I don't mean to hit this over the head. This is my situation. Section A, except in downtown areas, all new development and redevelopment shall be required to provide off-street parking. Except in the downtown area. So that tells me there's no requirement. Then B says that it'll be assessed. I guess my point is this. The buildings that are in the downtown core exist. I would guess 90% of them don't have any room for parking. Some of the banks do. Bigger facilities. They know that Rolson's downtown. But look at the places you shop downtown. They will never be able to, if they redevelop, require parking. So don't say that this council and staff should start going after them for parking when the bylaw says they don't need it. I find this a little bit twisted the way this is, and this is no disrespect to those that wrote it. I just find it a little bit odd that we may reduce the parking. Reduce what parking requirements? There are none. It doesn't make sense. Sorry, I don't have the motion other than get rid of section C in its entirety.
Okay, that's a possibility. Are you making that a motion? Mr. Black. Councillor Black, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I think you're right. It is kind of a mishmash, hard to understand. But I know it did come with some consultation with the downtown people. I do know that, and they were presenting some of their concerns about, well, if you did have cash in lieu, let's say one building at the West End provided cash in lieu, when would they get their parking? And where would it be? Would it be in the east And like, what good would it do them if they do cash and lieu at the west end and they do a new lot down at the east end? What good is that to them? You know, so they talked about that. They talked about some of the redevelopment of non-commercial, like apartment buildings, and how do you accommodate the parking for them? But yeah, they agree with what you're saying in terms of the existing commercial. Yeah, there's tons of buildings downtown that have no parking whatsoever. So, and I think that's where, you know, A comes in with those ones. It's I guess what it's trying to do is split up, you know, maybe 2 or 3 different situations all in one policy, and maybe it should go back to staff to sort it out a little bit better and identify kind of option A, option B, option C. Maybe it should go back to staff for a review.
Mayor Luke.
My last time I'll speak on this. I don't even know why I'm getting worked up about it, other than it doesn't make sense to me the way it's worded. I understand the intent. I guess I'll leave this alone. But please, staff, if the Malibu Club decides to come for a permit to redevelop, please do not say, yeah, we'll give it, but we want off-street parking. Oh, you don't have any room for it on that site, obviously. Well, then we want a contribution. If they say no, then don't hold the development up, drop it. Get on with the development. Why? Because our bylaw says they don't have to provide it in the first place. You know, I'm trying to get our development application somewhat streamlined and make it easier to redevelop our downtowns that are so desperately. We don't need any more roadblocks or hold up to try to get some activity in our downtown. If a developer wants to develop, let's say the Malibu Club, and doesn't give a darn about off-street parking and doesn't by law have to provide it, we shouldn't be worried about it. Get the development through. It's been that way without parking for the last, and you know, you think 6 or 8 apartment buildings in their units need some off-street parking. Yeah, so do 150 people in there at the local watering hole on a Friday night need somewhere to park.
Go ahead, Councillor Brunton.
Question through you to staff. The in-well development, I know it's not in the downtown core, but when they did that development, how did we deal with their parking? They don't have hardly any parking. Yeah, but nowhere near what the requirement would have been. And I'm sure a large number of them don't even have cars.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Brunton, I don't remember the specific details of the indwell proposal, but I believe that they did have a little bit of reduced parking. They do have some parking on site.
Yeah, I realize that. Yeah. But I think we're going to see more of that type of thing as time goes on here. And Mayor Luke, if he wants that clause out, I totally agree with him. Like, if there is no requirement now in the downtown core, get rid of it. But I think we got to look beyond just the downtown core for how the demographics are changing and what we need for social housing. So, anyways, perhaps you can go back and look at that whole issue. Thank you.
I believe we had a motion, and Mayor Luke, you're talking about doing away with C altogether, or was it B? I think it was C when it talks about parking on site to accommodate the proposed uses. The county may reduce or eliminate parking requirements for all developments or classes of development within the downtown area.
Chairman, C is my issue. You know, it just, there's too many mays there. Like, it says, if the required parking cannot be provided.
Okay,
There is no required parking in the downtown core.
okay. Getting all kinds of signals over here. Okay, Matt?
I'm debating whether to say anything more on this issue. Mayor Luke brings up a good point. But the problem with the existing wording in the official plan is that it doesn't allow what you've already done in the zoning bylaw. In the zoning bylaw, you've exempted parking in the downtown, which is fine. And that's how people or staff would deal with the Malibu Club if they came forward with a redevelopment. The intended wording was to provide council, to recognize that council has eliminated parking in the downtown areas and also give it options to do, eliminate it for all classes of development in the downtown, perhaps have a different policy for residential development in the downtown. Maybe the parking for a 40-unit condominium would be half of what you would normally require. It gives you options to do all sorts of different things. That's what it was intended to do. Whether you like that or not, that's up to you. I think the issue that was raised by Councillor Brunton is a good issue in terms of perhaps having some policy about without really saying what the actual regulations are, but perhaps reducing parking requirements for different types of development where parking needs are lower. And I can undertake to take a look at adding some wording into the plan to deal with that issue. I think it's worth exploring.
If I can add, Mr. Chairman, as well to Mayor Luke, it also takes us back, or through each development proposal, you have to consider the zoning bylaw, which is our regulatory document. And in the CBD, the zoning bylaw says no parking spaces are required for any lands identified in the CBD zone. So therefore, your example of the Malibu, they're not required to have parking, period.
Mr. Chair, could I make a motion that on page 198, section C at the bottom of 823, that it be reduced to say simply this: all new development or redevelopment in the downtown areas shall be encouraged to provide sufficient parking on site to accommodate the proposed use, period. Never mind all the other maybe, could be, should be, would be, down the block, we might need some money. Just encourage them, if the use is, should have some off-street parking, that they provide it. Because in the end, they don't have to.
Okay. To make that a motion, okay? You got that?
Thank you. Through the chair to Mayor Luke, if you could just repeat the last part of the motion, please.
Under section C, it's the first sentence that is in black typo.
Yep.
That's all.
Okay, all right. You want to read it for us, please?
Through the chair to committee, that section 8.23, item C, be amended to read as follows. All new development or redevelopment in the downtown areas shall be encouraged to provide sufficient parking on site to accommodate the proposed use.
Period. Councillor Oliver, Councillor Black. Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we were to implement the mayor's recommendation, is there anything else in our official plan that gives the county the authority to charge cash in lieu, should it choose to do so any place?
Without doing a word search for cash in lieu, I don't recall any other policies, so...
Okay. That being the case, Mr. Chairman, I don't think I can support the motion. I know where the mayor's coming from completely, and yes, there's all kind of flexibility built in there, but I would not want to lose the right to charge someone cash in lieu under a certain circumstance in a certain location. Could be Delhi, could be Cortland, could be Port Dover. if this is implemented as per the suggestion, we may lose the authority to do that, and for that reason, I don't think I'll support the motion.
Councillor Black.
And I absolutely appreciate where the mayor is coming from, and that's exactly where I was coming from before, until the downtown